No one expected a quiet veteran to become the center of an HOA nightmare, but the fine taped to his door would expose a truth buried for 60 years. Mark Ellis had returned from service decades ago, built a modest home, and lived quietly under the radar of the neighborhood HOA. He waved politely, kept his lawn neat, and never attended meetings. That silence made him an easy target. When a new HOA president took over, rules tightened overnight. Cameras appeared, warnings multiplied, and fines arrived like threats. One morning, Mark found an official notice demanding $5,000 for unauthorized property use. The accusation made no sense. He hadn't built anything. He hadn't changed anything. He simply lived. The HOA president, confident and loud, claimed Mark violated a regulation older than the neighborhood itself. She warned of liens, court action, and public embarrassment. Neighbors whispered. Some avoided eye contact. Others assumed Mark had done something wrong. The pressure mounted quickly, and the deadline loomed, but Mark didn't panic. He opened an old wooden box he'd kept since his father passed away. Inside were yellowed papers, folded maps, and a deed dated long before the HOA existed. As he studied them, his expression didn't change, but the story was about to, because the fine wasn't just unfair, it was a mistake that would unravel everything, and the HOA had no idea what they had just triggered. The HOA president believed power came from loud voices and quick threats. She had no idea history was about to answer her authority. At the next HOA meeting, she stood proudly, announcing Mark's fine as an example. She spoke about compliance and consequences, smiling as heads nodded. Mark sat quietly in the back row, holding a folder on his lap. He listened as she promised legal action if payment wasn't made within 7 days. The room felt heavy, like judgment had already been passed. When Mark finally stood, the president looked amused. She reminded everyone of his violation and suggested he apologize. Instead, Mark calmly asked a single question: "May I submit documentation?" Laughter rippled through the room. The president waved her hand dismissively but allowed it. Mark placed copies of the documents on the table. Old land surveys. Original zoning maps. A deed signed in ink, dated 60 years earlier. The president barely glanced at them before declaring them irrelevant. She claimed HOA authority overruled everything else, but one board member leaned forward, eyes narrowing. He recognized the seal. Another member pulled out a tablet and began searching records. The room grew quiet. Mark spoke again, softly. He explained the land boundaries hadn't changed since his father purchased the property. He explained easements. He explained grandfathered rights. For the first time, the HOA president stopped smiling. Because those papers didn't defend Mark, they questioned the HOA itself. Confidence turns fragile when truth enters the room, and the HOA president felt it slipping through her fingers. The meeting adjourned early, tension thick in the air. The HOA president insisted the documents would be reviewed, but her voice lacked certainty. Mark walked out without another word. Outside, neighbors whispered again, but this time with curiosity, not judgment. Within days, the HOA's attorney requested copies of Mark's paperwork. Then requested more time. Then stopped returning calls. The fine was suddenly placed on hold. The president claimed it was routine, but panic had already begun behind closed doors. Mark waited patiently. He didn't gloat. He didn't threaten. He simply watched as emails grew frantic and board members resigned one by one. A title researcher confirmed what Mark already knew: his property predated the HOA charter. A clause buried deep in county records granted his land permanent exemptions from future associations. That exemption didn't just cancel the fine, it erased the HOA's authority over his entire block. When the president finally received the legal report, her hands shook. She had fined someone she never had jurisdiction over. Worse, enforcing that fine exposed the loophole publicly. Other homeowners began asking questions. Old deeds surfaced. Boundaries were challenged, the power structure cracked, and the president realized she wasn't facing a stubborn homeowner. She was facing 60 years of law. What began as a $5,000 fine became a legal earthquake, and the HOA stood directly over the fault line. An emergency meeting was called. Attendance tripled. Homeowners demanded answers. The HOA president tried to regain control, but documents were projected on a screen behind her: maps, signatures, dates that couldn't be argued away. The attorney explained the loophole carefully, each word landing like a blow. Mark's land rights weren't unique. They were foundational. The HOA had been built around them, assuming compliance that never legally existed. By targeting Mark, the HOA forced a review that should have happened decades earlier. The president attempted to shift blame. She blamed past boards. She blamed poor records. She blamed misunderstanding. But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. They understood what this meant. If Mark was exempt, others might be too. Fees, fines, restrictions, all suddenly questionable. A vote was called to suspend enforcement actions. Then another to remove the president pending investigation. She stood frozen as hands rose across the room. Mark didn't celebrate. He simply nodded once, acknowledging the truth finally spoken aloud. The fine was officially withdrawn, but the damage had already spread, because the loophole didn't just protect Mark, it dismantled the illusion of control the HOA depended on. Power doesn't fall loudly, it collapses quietly, piece by piece. In the weeks that followed, homeowners requested refunds. Lawsuits were discussed. The HOA's budget unraveled as legal fees mounted. The president resigned before formal removal, leaving behind silence and unanswered emails. Mark returned to his routine. Morning walks. Coffee on the porch. Neighbors now greeted him with respect, some even gratitude. He had become a symbol not of rebellion, but of patience. County officials updated records publicly. The exemption was real. The loophole undeniable. News spread beyond the neighborhood, drawing attention no HOA ever wants. Meetings were canceled. Rules relaxed. Enforcement vanished. One afternoon, a former board member approached Mark, apologizing. He admitted they never expected resistance, especially not from someone so quiet. Mark smiled politely and said nothing. The fine notice still hung framed in his hallway, not as a trophy, but a reminder. A reminder that authority without understanding is fragile. A reminder that history matters. The HOA would never recover its former power, and all of it traced back to one mistake: they find the wrong man and awaken the past they ignored. Every story promises a moment that makes it worth watching. This was the moment everything finally made sense. At the final HOA gathering, now sparsely attended, the attorney formally announced dissolution proceedings. The association could no longer enforce rules consistently or afford operations. What once controlled hundreds of homes quietly faded into paperwork and silence. Mark was asked if he wished to speak. He stood, looked around the room, and thanked everyone. Not sarcastically. Not proudly. He thanked them for listening when it mattered. He explained he never wanted conflict. He only wanted fairness. People nodded. Some looked ashamed. Others relieved. Outside, the sign at the neighborhood entrance was removed weeks later. No announcement. No ceremony. Just gone. Mark's father's old deed was returned to its box. Its job was done. The loophole wasn't a trick, it was a truth waiting for the right moment, and that moment came when power forgot humility. The HOA learned too late, but the lesson would last far longer than the fine ever could. Some victories are loud, others simply restore balance. Life returned to normal, but not the old normal. A better one. Neighbors governed themselves. Conversations replaced notices. Respect replaced fear. Mark remained the same man he had always been: quiet, steady, and free. The $5,000 fine that once threatened him became a story told to newcomers, a warning about assumptions and unchecked authority. The 60-year-old loophole became proof that patience and truth outlast intimidation. Mark never sued. Never demanded apologies. He didn't need to. The outcome spoke louder than any confrontation, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.